right, so tell us who you are, Dr. Yeager. Explain who you are and what's going on with you.
So I am Dr. Corey Yeager. I am a native of Arkansas City. I am currently the team psychologist for the Detroit Pistons. Um, I live in Detroit during the season, kind of back and forth, but home base is Minneapolis. That's where I am currently with my family. Um, my wife Carrie, we've been married for 20 years with 4 boys that are currently eating us out of house and home.
Yeah, they should be at college somewhere.
Yes, at this point, I'm hoping that college comes back online sooner than later. But that's a little bit about the work that I'm doing. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, kind of a systems relational contextual therapist. So I'm interested in what stories we all have, how those stories are impacted by others. I'm interested in the family unit, so how families operate and how communities operate. And it's all for me. All of my therapeutic endeavors are really about relationships. I'm specifically interested in my research agenda through my doctoral work was specific to the African American family, but do therapy really kind of across the board. But again, my main focus right now is working within the NBA for the Pistons.
So how do you see, so let's just start with sports. I know that a lot of people right now are totally devastated in the fact that that was the first thing that was shut down. Before schools were shut down, before anything else was shut down, we started to see that basketball was shut down because that's what people were playing basketball at the time. The NBA the Jazz had some people that got sick, didn't know they were sick. That's how we started kind of having the conversations about being asymptomatic. So what do you think psychologically that does to us when we are a very entertainment driven society?
Yeah, it's one of the things that my wife and I were talking, and luckily my mom taught me early on, hey boy, don't tell me you're bored, and you'll figure it out. So I figured out at a young age and throughout my life to not be dependent on being entertained. But our society is really incumbent upon being entertained, sports and concert, different things. So I think the psychological impact of the isolation that we're working through now has been extremely heavy. One thing that we know about isolation is it produces anxiety. Right? I say if you have any tendency towards anxiety, isolation will expand that.
Okay.
Anxiety. So I think that has probably been the most profound psychological impact that our communities and our society has dealt with. Again, so this is not an American issue. This is a global pandemic, a global issue. And when we talk about sports really cuts across the globe.
Right.
Right. China is one of the biggest fan bases for the NBA in the world. So when all of a sudden that was taken offline, and again, you said it right, the NBA was the very first sport to say, the first major venture to say, all right, we're going to shut everything down before really anybody else. I think that impact has been felt deeply and strongly. And I think everybody's just kind of waiting. I think the world is waiting to see, will we come back to a new normal? What is that going to be? So I think we're just trying to manage through it, and we're all hopeful that things will return to some semblance of norm. But the one thing that I also know is that hope is not a strategy.
True.
Hope is good. It's not a strategy, though. So we have people that are strategizing. I know that our leadership, Commissioner Adam Silver, has been hopeful but strategic in his planning. So I know there's tons of meetings and conversations, not just with the NBA, but across organizations about how will will we get things back online?
Hmm.
And when is it going to be safe to do that? I think it's happening a lot
Right.
for a lot of people.
So when we talk about strategy, so you talk about, you have to be strategic. Hope is a very large component of that, because that keeps us from going into depression. But strategically, what should we be doing as families to kind of help? Because there is going to be a post-COVID, but what does that look like? Because our world is going to be very different. We won't go back to the same world that we had pre-COVID. So strategically, what should we be looking at?
Like I think the one thing that I think strategically we should do, and it doesn't seem like a strategy, but I think it really is that we must find grace with those around us. All right, so now all of a sudden we're all in one home.
Mm.
Nobody can move around much. So you have to have grace with how everyone is feeling, and everyone's going to act and react differently to this isolation.
Mm.
All of a sudden, kids are coming home from college, and parents are like, "Oh my God, this kid is going to drive me crazy." So how do we find grace with those around us? And I think more importantly than finding grace with those around us, how do we find grace with ourselves? How do we give grace
Mm.
to ourselves? Which is probably new territory for many. Like, I don't even know what that means.
Right.
But giving myself the opportunity to know I'm gonna be okay. We're gonna figure this out. Don't be hard on yourself. To your point about depression, I talked a little bit about anxiety. Depression is the other end of the spectrum. And one thing that I tell a lot of people, Doc, is this, therapeutically, is that depression is ruminating about things that have happened in the past.
Okay.
I'm ruminating, it's spinning through my head. What happened? What can I, oh my goodness, and I'm worried about that. That causes and produces depression. Well, anxiety is produced when you ruminate about what's going to happen in the future.
Okay.
Right? I'm worried about what's going on. A lot of people right now in this isolation, when will I go back to work and how will we handle all this?
Mm-hmm.
If you ruminate and spin through that a lot, it'll produce anxiety.
Okay.
One way we can caution against both that depression and anxiety piece is to stay in the moment. Because if I'm in the moment, I'm not worried about what happened, and I'm not worried about what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And what is the practice for staying in the moment is to focus on your breathing.
Okay.
Right? You focus on your breathing, you are forced into the current moment. So reminding ourselves when we begin to spin into that depressive or anxiety space, all right, let me calm myself. Let me take some deep breaths. Let me focus on what that feels like. What's that doing to my body as I take deep breaths? That brings us back into these current moments, and really becomes a protective factor against depression and or anxiety. Some people have both of them.
Right. So I guess from that I go to the next thought is that as Black people who tend to be very religious, church oriented, when you start to say things like breathing, people freak out because they think that that's, like, oh my God, that's something that's, we're just supposed to trust God. We're just supposed to pray. And I know people that are praying, but they still are anxious and they still are depressed and they still have, are suicidal and they still are, homicidal. And so how do we combat that theory between, there are some practices that are just good practices that may not be that are not necessarily based in religion. I mean, so yoga is not a bad thing. It's, it's who you're focusing on and what you're focusing on. So that, I mean, there's all kinds of great practices, but if we allow religion to get in the way of that, we can miss some of that.
Sure. And I think to those points, one of the things that we have to recognize is that the good Lord put all kinds of options and opportunities and support mechanisms in place. So I grew up in the Church of God in Christ. I went to church all the time.
We
right?
was always at church.
6'11",
Yes.
but with all of that in place, we have to recognize that there will be people and supports that may not seem normalized to us in the African American community. We have stigmatized therapy and finding that support. We almost have been told that's so crazy.
So therapists are not the devil.
They are not the devil. Yeah, yeah, I like that. We have to emphasize. I may need to get something written up on that. Therapists are not the devil.
Right.
But all we are, therapy is really not anything special. I say it all the time. Therapy is conversation.
Right.
All I'm doing in therapy, Doc, is saying, tell me your story.
Mm-hmm.
And from your story, there will be patterns that emerge. From those patterns, I'm gonna grab those patterns and say, hey, Doc, you said something 3 times that tunes in for me. Let me ask you a few questions about that. I didn't do anything special there. I listened to your story.
Right.
And from that story, I, to some degree, regurgitated some of those thoughts and hopefully made myself as a therapist kind of move into the process of being a awareness facilitator. That's all a therapist is. Let me help you with your awareness. Let me facilitate awareness. It is nothing special. There is no magical trick to being a therapist. And why wouldn't we find the ability to couple religion and therapy? Because we can do
Okay.
that. We need to do that. And it's not crazy making. It is finding those mechanisms of support that will help us. And it looks different for all of us. Some people will say, hey man, I don't that mindfulness stuff, I ain't with that. And that's fine. Everybody's not gonna engage in that.
Right.
Everybody's not gonna love yoga. You don't have to, but finding the ability to kind of gain therapeutic support doesn't have to come from a therapist either. Your friends, when you have conversation, if you think about it this way, if we've ever had relationship issues, some of the very first things that we tend to do is to connect with our friends and explain, here he go again.
Right.
He don't listen. I love him, but right?
Right.
What are you sitting
Right.
there? Seeking therapy.
Right.
You're seeking support. So we're already doing it. I think it's just the language that has been developed around therapy that has stigmatized really in society, but more deeply and disproportionately in the African American community.
So as we are isolated, or I don't like to use isolated, as we are being distanced in our homes, as we are being in solitude is the word I choose to use. What are ways in which we can, because you said give grace, but what do I do if I don't know what that looks like? Because maybe I've been in a situation where grace has never really been shown to me. So I really don't even know when you say show grace, I'm not even sure what that means.
So grace could feel like this. I'm anxious. I've got everyone in the house. And what we're going to do, I've done it as a parent recently. Short out. Hey, boy, get away from me.
Right.
You're driving me up a wall. And then an hour later, I thought through that a little bit and said, no, I can't do that to that boy. Hey, come here, son. Hey, my bad. Dad is struggling. Dad's trying to keep everything together.
Don't know what day it is.
It's Saturday. Every day is a weekend. So even grace could feel and sound like, hey, I apologize for that little outburst I had. That we just trying to make it. So
Right.
that's giving grace, right? And sometimes you can't. It's hard to give grace in the moment once you get things going, but you still have the ability to reflect and go back.
Okay.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Let me go back and say, I'm going to do better with that. And that doesn't mean you're not going to, a week later, do something similar. But being aware of how our engagement impacts those around us. And when we know that it's been out of bounds or it's been edgy, finding the ability to re-engage and to quote unquote apologize,
right,
is a version of grace. And doing that same thing with ourselves. Hey, you don't need to be so hard on yourself. We're going to get through this, right? Even saying that to myself is a version of grace.
Okay. So as we look at that, as we look at extending grace, as we look at how do we move forward, I don't know about in Minnesota, but I know here in Wichita, we have had an uptick in domestic violence. And so just like we're having struggles, the other person is having struggles, but you only think about yourself. How do we how what are things that we can do, because we can't necessarily be in physical proximity, but we're talking to people on the phone, we're seeing messages that people are putting on social media. What are ways in which we can reach out and be helpful to other people?
I think that one thing that we must, one of the main things that comes to mind with that question is that we can't try to reach out and save the world, but let me engage in my small social network. We all have them.
Hmm.
Those 20, 30 people that you're closest to. I mean, you may have 100 people, but who are those 20 or 30 people that I'm closest to?
Hmm.
And if I see someone on Facebook saying, I'm struggling with this or that, and they're in that network, how do I make assure myself and my network that I'm going to engage?
Hmm.
I'm going to reach out and say, "Hey, I saw you put something on Facebook about the struggle. Hey, you are not unique in that suffering. It is not just you. We are all going through something quite similar. I want you to know I'm here for you.
Hmm.
Let's talk. You doing better today? Are you right? So, what's your outlet when things get rough in the home? What's your outlet? Do you
Right.
have a preconceived notion of when things get tough? Do you put your jacket on and go for a 30-minute walk to get away from everyone? Do you reach out to your friend? Right? Finding that rhythm on how we engage and support, I think, before the issues occur is really critical. It's tougher to do when I let the issues blow up.
Right.
Now I'm in the middle of it,
Hmm.
right? I mean, you don't buy the fire extinguisher for your home when your house is on fire.
Right.
It's fire. It's late to be buying the fire extinguisher. But why do you buy the fire extinguisher? In anticipation,
Right.
hoping that it never occurs and that I never need to pull the pin on that and use it. But it is in anticipation. So with this isolation, with these moments where we're in solitude, can we start to think through, okay, when I'm struggling with, when my wife is struggling with, when the
Hmm.
boys are struggling with, how will I handle that? When my friends in my social network are struggling, how will I handle that? Um, One of the things that I did for our organization in the NBA, so I wrote a short article, and I'll share it with you.
Okay.
Almost pointed set of bullets to say, hey, when anxiety is trying to come visit, because Doc, one of the things that I say is anxiety is not a part of me;
Right.
it's something that I'm dealing with.
Okay.
It's not. It's not gory. It's something that he may deal with. So if I'll share this document. If I can have some pointed understanding and frames on what to do when anxiety knocks at my door and seeks to visit, when I hear it ring the doorbell, how do I say I'm not answering that today?
True.
Um,
True.
right? How do I understand that's not what I want to? I'm not by thinking that, well, I'm an anxious person. Well, you're a person, first and
Hmm.
foremost. Anxiousness comes to visit.
Right.
And just like when we look at our phone, sometimes our phone rings or a text comes across, and I say to my wife and to people all the time, just because the phone rings, that's just an indication that someone wants to talk to me. That
Right.
don't mean I gotta pick up the phone.
This is true.
I appreciate that you called, but I'm not picking the phone up right now. I'll get back to you. So I'm saying that anxiety even has a home. There's moments that anxiety is not a bad thing because what does it produce? It produces a heck of a lot. You just think about when you were in school. Test anxiety may not be the worst thing. It's going to push me to study.
Right.
It's going to push me to prepare differently. So not thinking that anxiety and those things are just all bad all the time because they're not. It's how we frame them. It's how we engage with them that becomes the most critical issue.
So if there were going to be, like your top 5 things for people to be kind of engaging in doing to kind of help them through this season, because we don't the one, I guess the hard part to this is we don't know when this season is going to be over. It'd be different. It's different when it's summer or it's fall or it's a season in which we know that there's an end, but we don't know when this is going to end. So what are, maybe the top 5 things that you would suggest that people are doing in order to be the most mentally fit that they can be in a situation where they don't know the end.
So, one thing would be knowing who you are. Who am I when I get stressed? Tune into yourself. Know who you are. I know who I am when I'm stressed. Actually, I'm very cold. I'll get cold. I'm not gonna scream and yell a lot, but I'll get cold. Like, hey, don't talk to me. Leave me alone. Right? I know that about myself.
True.
So as I feel things building, I know, okay, I'm about to get cold on people. I don't want to do that. That's not helpful. So that first piece is knowing who I am.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding secondly, understanding those around you and how you engage or disengage with them and what that means.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That my sons may need me differently today than they did a month and a half ago or 5 weeks ago when this started. So understanding who my babies are, who my wife is, who my friends, who my social network is, who I am to them, so I can be prepared to be supported.
Mm-hmm.
Recognizing also, thirdly, recognizing that what we've done in life oftentimes is continuously make relational deposits. Hey, what do you need? You need help with this? I'm going to be there for you. Continuously, we're making relational deposits. We must recognize when it's time to withdraw. Because
you're preaching to me.
We must understand if you have a bank account, you don't just deposit.
Right.
You have a bank account. Well, I deposit, so when I need to withdraw, I know the money is there.
Right.
So if I'm continuously depositing relationally, there will come a time that it's time for me to withdraw.
Right.
And my withdrawal will come from my social network. That I'll reach out to friends and say, I'm struggling over here, man. I don't know how to deal with this. What I'm doing in that moment is asking for withdrawal.
Right.
I need something, right? So being okay with that withdrawal. I think it's important to seek some type of, whatever semblance it is, some understanding of therapeutic support. That doesn't mean that it's got to be a therapist. Doesn't mean that. But I do need to figure out, all right, so when these struggles come, who am I going to turn to and what support am I asking for? So my wife knows yesterday I was on a conference call and I was absolutely through the roof frustrated. Like, I don't know how to do this on this computer. I can't pull it up. And I don't get really edgy. But what did she do when I did that? She got very calm. She knew. Hey, so do you want me to help you with that? Almost even in how she was talking. And I was edgy. And I was on a 10, but she was on a 3.
Right.
So she had recognized, he's moving. Let me settle down. He's going to come out of that. He's not going to stay in that space. And then last night, late, we're in the bed. I'm watching TikTok, laughing. And she said, you were a little edgy today. I said, I'm sorry. Right? That was grace that she was giving in the moment. She was giving me grace.
Right.
He looked in his mind over not being able to click on the laptop. Right. He's shorting out. I'm going to give him grace. And then I had to give grace to say, I apologize.
Right.
Right? So the last piece I would say that's really important, Doc, is in relationships, the critical aspect of relationships is that we must be committed to repair. Not be one-sided.
Right.
That if it's a husband and wife, there are going to be issues. It is the nature of humanity to have issues when you are together. So if we know that to be the case, and we do, then can both of us be committed to repair when those issues do come up?
Yeah.
That's what my wife and I did.
Yeah.
That's what I'm sorry. I'm committed to repair that. I'm not going to let that just sit out there and say, well, I ain't apologizing. I don't care. Well, then that's one-sided. So that committed to repair aspect is extremely important and something that we can revisit when chaos ensues. Right. So those would be a few of the pointers. I got 700. But those are the things that stand out the most in this current time.
Yeah, I would totally agree. Somebody said, where do you feel like a sounding board is essential? So who should I be seeking? I mean, yes, we all have friends that are, always have the best advice that are, in their mind.
Yes, quote unquote.
Right. They have the best advice. But who, as those sounding boards, who should we be seeking to hear us? Because it may not always be our spouse.
That's right. And many times I gotta see you every day. I don't want to talk to you about this as a spouse. I don't want,
Right.
right? I want to talk to somebody outside of this relationship. So I think we already know those people that we can turn to. We usually know who they are. But our pastors are people that we can turn to.
Okay.
It's actually to shoot a quick email and say to the pastor, "Hey, I want to talk. I'm struggling with something." The pastor's not gonna turn their back.
Right.
Okay, we want to talk. Let's get on a call this evening.
Right.
Now you get to convey, "Hey, I'm struggling with this or that or this." That's a sounding board. That's a space in which you can get it off your chest. There's a lot of research out that says when we have struggles, two ways in which we can relieve pressure around those struggles. One is to talk to someone. We know that.
Right.
So even though I know you can't fix my issue, when I come to talk to you, I'm not really asking you to fix it.
Because I already have the answer inside of me. I just haven't been able to process it.
That's right. And 9 times out of 10, that processing comes through me just putting it, let me get it out.
Right.
Let me say it out loud. Even though I know you can't fix it, let me say it out loud. Because at the end of the conversation, we usually say, "I feel better." Well, they didn't fix it.
Right.
They listened. And the other way that we can do it is one way is to talk. The second way that the research tells us that we can relieve pressure is to write. Let me sit down and write. That doesn't mean anyone ever needs to see that, right?
Right.
It could be that you want to write a letter and send it to someone. It could be that I'm writing for myself. Let's understand the importance of writing for ourselves. Writing about what I'm feeling, about what I'm seeing and hearing. If I can write, I'm getting it out of me. Right? It's almost a release of the poison that's inside of us.
Right.
That as we move through society, as we deal with trauma, that's poison that's dumped into us. We didn't go seek it many times. It comes and dumps into us.
Right.
So we want to relieve that poison. You don't want that in your body, right? If you call the CDC, if some kid gets under the cabinet and drinks a bottle of Windex because it looks like soda,
right?
We call that number. What is the one thing that they're going to say?
Get it out.
Milk. We're trying to induce. We want them to vomit.
Right.
Why? You get the poison out.
Right.
Life is no different. That we want to seek opportunity to get the poison out. Writing gets the poison out, and engaging in conversation gets the poison out.
Where's your being in sports? I would imagine that exercise is a piece of that. So how do we use exercise and physical activity as a way to? We know that we can't go to gyms, but walking is free. Being able to work in our yard is free. So how do you see that as part of a therapeutic plan?
Well, I think it's more critical now than ever because we're locked up and tied up in the home setting. So being able to get out and get your face in the sun, right? Vitamin D in the sun does something for the body and the mind. And you said, even I heard somebody was talking about in World War II, during World War II, people had what they call victory gardens. So they would get out and get a garden started because it would supply food from your own yard.
Right.
It also would allow you to be in the earth, moving around. I think of my Granny Georgie. Every year around this time, she would be out in that garden and calling Papa, "Get over here and pull these weeds."
Right.
Working in the earth. There's something about being in the earth that does a reduction of anxiety. It doesn't allow me to be as anxious. It doesn't allow me to be as depressed. So that movement, Doc, I think is something that you hit on that's critically important now. My wife and I'm a fat boy. I've always been a fat boy. I changed it anytime lately. But my wife has kind of been on me I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, I don't feel like walking. I want to watch a movie. Turn Netflix on. Yeah,
Right.
let's turn Netflix on after we go walk.
Right.
And then what I did, Doc, is as I began to walk, I found myself saying, this feels good.
Yeah.
Actually,
Yeah.
I didn't think it would, but once I get out there, it feels good. I feel better
Yeah.
sitting down to turn Netflix on after we went for a long walk.
Yeah.
So just finding those ways to move, because we don't want, I use this metaphor a lot therapeutically, we don't want to be a pond, we want to be a river.
Right.
We want to keep moving, right?
Right.
If you dump poison into a pond and go back 3 days later and test the water, the poison is there.
Right.
If you dump poison into a river at a certain point and go back to that same point 3 days later, what the
It's
water's
washed
clean,
away. Yeah.
right? It's moving.
Yeah.
So we want to keep moving. We don't want to be sedentary. We want to keep moving.
Yeah. So yeah, it was interesting that we had already scheduled this time to talk today, and I kind of hit the wall earlier in the week and was like, "Oh my God, the struggle is real." And then the next day, exactly what you said. We decided, hey, let's get the dogs. Let's go. We live on 5 acres, so I didn't necessarily have to go anywhere else. I could stay in my isolation, but I could walk. And so we just walked our dogs in our space, but it did make a difference. The light, the sun was out, it was warm, and it made a lot of difference. So
And you felt better? Yeah,
absolutely.
and that's simple though. One of the things that I'm saying, Doc, too, is
And I hate outside.
I'm not outside. I ain't feeling trying to go, oh, look at the mountains. I ain't good. Put it on a picture. I'm good. I don't need to see it.
Right.
But that connectedness to outside in these moments more critical now than ever. I really believe that. Just being out, even if you weren't walking, if you're out sitting on your porch
Mm-hmm.
in the sun, it does something for us. So I think that's really important.
I think there was something to, the fact that our grandparents, my grandfather could out haul hay.
What?
He used to send y'all high schoolers out there, the football team out there to haul, and he would out haul you. But I think there was some value to the fact that they were out there doing that physical labor and making those gardens and working in the yard and working in the earth, that they were a much more settled group of people.
Man, Uncle Will called me bigoted my whole life. Still, I can hear Uncle Will's voice saying bigot. But I think you hit something, the nail on the head when you said, I mean, they lived long lives and they worked their butts off.
They did.
They were outside and feeding the pigs and hauling hay
Mm-hmm.
and down by the river fishing and setting out a line. They were continuously moving. They were not on phones.
Right.
They were not saying, I'm going to sit around and watch TV all day. That is not who our grandparents were. They were movers.
Right.
And I think the question is, did we learn from them?
True.
Right? We should learn from what my granny and papa ate bacon every day.
Right.
Lived into their night.
Scrape the stuff off those pig ears. I mean, come on now.
That's right.
And don't get me wrong, I'm not eating any of that stuff now, but there was a value. I mean, they lived in their 80s and 90s. I mean, there was something to that.
Yes. And Aunt Hortense was making the best burgers in the world, but they
Yes.
were working.
Yes.
I mean, they were moving. So we must take a modicum and a dose of information from what they did and apply. Each generation should be learning from the previous.
Yeah.
If not, we've taken steps backward.
Yeah.
So now, more than ever, is an opportunity. We have a lot of time on our hands. Are we reflecting on who we are and who our community is?
Mm-hmm.
How did our community, my granny used to always say, hey, boy, that depression stuff gonna come back again. Y'all better make sure you're prepared. She was telling, right? We didn't learn from her.
Right.
Right? I think that's something that we have to do better. Now's a good time to be reflecting on who our people have been to us and what we can take away from that.
My husband's been preaching or doing Bible class for the last few weeks about making sure that we have created in our homes, that we've created one sanctuaries in our homes, but that we've also have created places in which we are learning to do things like garden and make sure that we have everything that we need. That if society was to shut down, if the internet was to shut down, if all those things were to shut down, could you be self-sustaining? And so I think that's something that we really have to begin to look at, in our angst to want to get back to quote unquote normal, and to quote, be so anxious to get back, and we want to get back to work, and we want to get back to all of these things. But what are we doing to make sure that because this is not it, this is the thing before the thing, this is the prep.
Yeah, yeah.
But what are we doing in this to make sure we're ready for that?
Yes. And I mean, that's exactly to that point of reflective, understanding what it is that we need to sustain ourselves, understanding what it is, what I need to do to help sustain not only my family, but my community, and being that community, being part of broader society. Are we taking the learnings that have been handed down, or do we shirk and forget them?
Absolutely.
We don't need that anymore. I have access there. All I need is Amazon.
Right.
If I got Amazon, why do I need to figure out how to garden when I can order everything I need?
Right.
Yeah, but what happens if Amazon is no longer available?
Right.
What happens if the grocery stores and the supply chain is interrupted, and now we have no opportunity? So we have to be thinking about those things, hoping that it never occurs, but that ain't a strategy.
Well, at the end of the day, Smithfield, they didn't think that they were going to, not be able to have a plant but there are people that had corona. I mean, so that whole plant had to shut down. So if you're a bacon lover, you got a problem.
Yes, good luck.
You're going to have a problem. Right. Absolutely. So I don't want to keep you. I know that we will, before this is over, we'll touch base again, because we have a lot of people that are saying, oh my God, this was so helpful. So we'll definitely touch base again before we are set free back into society. But what is something that you would like to leave people with, just to kind of encourage them and make sure that, while they're in their struggle, because it is a struggle, it's a transition, while they're in this transition season, while you all in our screen.
You saw it?
While we're in this transition, what is the one thing that you would say, do this so that you can be okay?
Stay connected with those that matter, and that you matter to, and that matter to you. Right? And one of the things I was talking to my nephew about yesterday, he said, seems like in life I've made a lot of the right moves. But I don't know that we ever make the right moves. We make the moves right. Right? I'm going to grind and work hard, and whatever moves that I have to do, I'm going to make them right. So I think it's that stay connected and not forgetting about the brotherhood and sisterhood that keeps us all afloat. That is the most critical thing that we have as human beings. That the human condition calls for human connection.
Yeah.
And if we lack that connection, we'll always be in disarray. So reminding ourselves of the importance of that connection, that brotherhood and sisterhood that has happened since the beginning of time, that will keep us afloat. And just, again, I think that last piece is giving grace to ourselves and others.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you for being connected. Thanks for being a friend. All the way back from, you're older than me, but not by a whole lot. But for being a lifelong friend, I appreciate that, and I appreciate you taking the time to come on. And like I said, we will definitely connect again before we are set free and loose back into our punishment is over. Like, when we were 13, we were grounded. And hey, I got 2 more days. So before our grounding is over, we'll make sure to connect again and make sure that we help some of our friends that are trying to figure out ways to connect and to transition. So thank you again. We appreciate you.
Thank you. Appreciate you too.
All right.